Legendary Battles presents the Battle of Bunker Hill. Happy 4th of July, everyone! Happy birthday, America! 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 I got rained out for a couple days clamming, so I decided to give you guys a 4th of July present. The historic Battle of Bunker Hill. The Battle of Bunker Hill, which strangely didn't even occur on Bunker Hill, is one of the most important battles in American history. It showed the British that the colonists were more than just an unruly mob, and it showed us that we could take on the giant of the British Empire. Although the colonists ultimately lose the battle to overwhelming British forces, they inflicted gruesome casualties on the Redcoats and ultimately sent General Thomas Gage and his troops packing from Boston. There, of course, had been discord brewing for over a decade between the colonies and the motherland in Great Britain. The majority of the strife was centered in and around Boston and Massachusetts. The main gripe, of course, for the colonies was the whole taxation without representation thing. In 1765, the British government passed the Stamp Act, which imposed a direct tax on the British colonies in America. It required that anything printed in America be printed on a particular paper, stamped, which included an emboldened revenue stamp by the British government. The Stamp Act was hugely unpopular, and the citizens of Boston were in outright defiance. In response to this defiance, King George sent 2,000 British soldiers to Boston as a show of force to try to dissuade the Boston Patriots. It had the opposite effect. Colonists who were anti-British were patriots, and colonists who favored the crown were called loyalists. There was an incredible amount of tension in the city of Boston. The patriots abhorred the British soldiers walking the streets, and the patriots were beginning to harass loyalists and vandalize their stores. When one such loyalist store was vandalized, a soldier shot through a window, mistakenly killing an 11-year-old boy. The patriots were hot and wanted retribution. A few weeks after the boy's death on March 5, 1770, British soldier Private Hugh White was alone guarding the king's money stored inside a customs house on King Street. An angry mob confronted him and started pelting him with snowballs. He ended up bayoneting one of the patriots, and bells began ringing around the city. Captain Thomas Preston with a handful of soldiers came to White's aid. They took a defensive position in front of the customs house. In the chaos that ensued, a soldier fired, causing the rest to fire. 5 Boston men lay dead and another 6 were wounded. The melee was dubbed the Boston Massacre. Tensions seemed to calm for a few years after the bloody altercation, but really groups like the Sons of Liberty and other patriots just went underground. Then on December 16, 1773, Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty dressed up as Mohawk tribe Native Americans and descended on Griffin's Wharf in Boston and dumped 342 chests of tea overboard ships belonging to the East India Company. The Townshend Act of 1767 imposed a large duty on colonists from anything imported from Britain, including their beloved tea. Then in 1773, Parliament imposed the Tea Act, making the East India Company the only company that could transport or sell tea, putting a bunch of colonial merchants out of work. The symbolic dumping of the tea was in response to these ridiculous laws imposed by the Crown, but it forced the British hand. In response, they sent General Thomas Gage along with thousands of British soldiers to Boston. The Crown installed him as governor of the Bay State, and he had ultimate say in anything that happened there. Massachusetts colonists were stripped of what little rights they had, and now they were thoroughly in the royal yoke at this point. Thomas Gage was not doing a very good job at quelling the uprising. After he took a munitions stockpile in Charlestown without firing a shot, stories raged throughout the colonies about how Gage and his soldiers murdered innocent and unarmed people. All over the Bay State, militias were ready for the call to arms. Thomas Gage very much underestimated the gumption of these colonists and militias and figured any actual show of force by British regulars, aka the Redcoats, would send the militias running. With outright rebellion at his front door, Thomas Gage heard of a munitions and gunpowder stockpile 20 miles northwest of the city in Concord, Mass. On April 18, 1775, as he assembled a force to move on Concord, colonial spies intercepted their initiative. Paul Revere made his famous night rise, screaming, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" The militias assembled and met the British force on Lexington Green. The British were taken by surprise by the force that gathered and ordered the group to disperse. Captain John Parker and his men held their ground until fired upon, and then they dispersed. The Redcoats continued their march towards Concord. Growing numbers of militia and Massachusetts Minutemen who claimed they could be ready for battle in as little as a minute gathered around the outskirts of the town. As the British moved to secure the town of Concord, colonists could see smoke rising and they thought that they were setting the village on fire, so they rushed down from the hills. Seeing the colonists coming in force, the Redcoats fell back to a better defensive position. The Redcoats fired a volley, killing a few militiamen, including the leader of the company, Captain Isaac Davis. Another man from his company, Major Buttrick, yelled, "For God's sakes, fire!" The Minutemen responded with a volley, killing 3 British and wounding 9 others, setting the British retreating. This volley is considered the famous shot heard round the world. The British leaders, Francis Smith and John Pitcairn, ordered a full retreat on what is now known as Battle Road, where angry militiamen attacked them back to Lexington Green, where Captain John Parker and his men rained down retribution on the Redcoats for their morning skirmish from behind stone walls and fences. The British were harried all the way back to Boston, suffering numerous casualties. It was a rout. The British were completely embarrassed and whooped by the militia. Only when they returned back to Boston and under cover of cannon fire from the main British garrison would they protected their retreat. Without any clear and formal leadership, the colonists probably should have pushed the issue and stormed the city, wiping out the British, but they did not. But Governor/General Thomas Gage was facing a bad situation. He and his forces were trapped basically on the island of Boston with thousands of patriots, colonists, and militiamen surrounding the city, and the numbers were growing by the hour. Gage, understanding how dire the situation was, requested backup. By June, the Crown had sent numerous reinforcements, commanded by Generals William Howe, Henry Clinton, and John Burgoyne. Militiamen from all over Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and even faraway Vermont stood ready to face the British regulars. Thomas Gage, now fortified with fresh reinforcements and numbers, decided to strike at the colonists. His new initiative was to seize the high ground north and south of the city. But yet again, the colonist spies intercepted this information, and under the cover of night, 1,000 Massachusetts and Connecticut militiamen moved to secure the high ground in the north on the peninsula of Charlestown on Breed's Hill. The sheer number of militiamen gathering on the hills outside Boston greatly troubled the British generals. The militiamen on Breed's Hill started to fortify the positions, and Gage knew he needed to move swiftly. General John Stark from New Hampshire, who was in charge of the garrison of Breed's Hill, realized his left flank alongside the Mystic River was exposed. The militia erected a large barricade overnight. When Gage saw what they had constructed overnight, he knew he needed to move fast before they fortified themselves any more on Breed's Hill. The British believed that a show of force from British regulars would scatter the militia easily. They were very, very wrong. On June 17th, a hot and steamy summer afternoon, Gage and his commanders ordered British regulars and grenadiers to move across Boston Harbor and to disembark on Lower Charlestown. Gage was planning on scattering the rebels with a direct head-on attack from the finest military in all the land. The tired but ready militiamen prepared themselves for battle in their hastily built fort as they saw the British move towards them in force. Led by General William Howe, King George's troops climbed Breed's Hill in perfect battle formation. The militiamen were extremely low on gunpowder and ammunition. They had not been resupplied yet. Legend has it that in the face of the British advance, American officer William Prescott told his men, "Don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes." Probably one of the single most badass things I ever heard as a kid in history class. When the British neared the edge of the fortification, the militiamen let loose with a vicious volley, creating absolute carnage. One patriot remarked, "They moved towards us in order to swallow us up, but they found a mouthful that would choke them." It was an absolute bloodbath as the Redcoats retreated to their lines. Once again, the British reassembled their lines and moved up the hill. They had to step over the bodies of their dead, which they claimed lay as thick as sheeps in a fold, whatever the fuck that means. And again they received another thunderous patriot volley that ripped through their lines. Finally, with their sheer numbers and the Patriots running out of ammunition, on the third attempt, the Redcoats broke through the Patriot lines, and fierce hand-to-hand combat broke out. A black soldier named Salem allegedly killed British Major John Pitcairn, who ordered his troops to shoot at colonists on Lexington Green. The British, with their mounted bayonets, ended up scattering the colonists, but at what a cost. The British casualties were estimated at 1,054, with the colonists only suffering 450 casualties. A British officer wrote, "Our 3 generals expected rather to punish a mob than fight with troops that would look them in the face." British General Henry Clinton was appalled at the carnage and called it a dear-bought victory. With their forces badly depleted, they abandoned their plans to attack the high ground south of the city as well, and ultimately later evacuated Boston en masse, leaving the city back to the Patriots. Although defeated, the colonists were not demoralized. They proved that they could stand up to the greatest standing army in the world and inflict large casualties. The militiamen who stayed and kept the British bottled up in Boston became the nucleus of the Continental Army. Transforming this ragtag group into a fighting force fell on the shoulders of Virginian George Washington, who assumed command in Cambridge, Massachusetts 2 weeks after the wrongly named Battle of Bunker Hill. The Battle of Breed's Hill turned a Boston Rebellion into the Revolutionary War. So when everyone wants to hate on us massholes, just remember, we're the ones that set this bitch off. Anyhow, happy 4th of July. Celebrate responsibly. No offense to my UK viewers, we still love you. Hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not already. And go enjoy your 4th.